Good afternoon. Welcome to the York Festival of Ideas, and thank you for your patience. This event is so popular, we had to move rooms to make sure we could get everybody in, so that's the reason we were shuffling everything around the last minute, so thanks for your patience. My name's Colin Philpott, I'm chairing the event. I'm a former National Museum Director and former journalist with the BBC, and I've been chairing events at this festival actually since it started, I think, which seems quite a long time ago now. So welcome. I'm pretty confident you will find the next hour interesting and illuminating, and I'll introduce our speaker in a moment. But I suppose the subject of what we eat, what's good for us, what's bad for us, is a never-ending debate, and one where advice does seem to change from time to time over the years, and it's something that, of course, we're all bothered about. So today, hopefully, we can throw a bit more light on this subject, thanks to our speaker, who's going to argue, essentially, I think, that the blanket dismissal of ultra-processed food as bad is unhelpful and not indeed accurate. Our speaker is Dr. Beverley O'Hara. Welcome. Beverley is lecturer in public health nutrition at Leeds Beckett University, and her research interests are centred around diet quality, weight-related health, and the sort of subject areas that she's particularly specialised in are obesity, including childhood obesity, and eating behaviour. And she is the network lead for the Yorkshire branch of the Association for the Study of Obesity. And Beverley's going to talk to us for about 35-40 minutes, and there will then be 15 minutes or so for your questions, and I'm sure there were plenty of those, but don't be shy in coming forward. So welcome, and can we please welcome Beverley O'Hara.
Hello, how lovely to see so many of you here. Of course, quite a current and wide-reaching topic. Lots of people are interested in food and nutrition, so it's really nice to be able to talk about that because it's something I'm really interested in too. Okay, so what is an ultra-processed food? There's the million-dollar question, and I'm not too sure whether I'll be able to actually give you the clarity that Colin is suggesting I might be able to by the end of 35-40 minutes, even by the end of 35-40 days, to be perfectly honest, because it's all a bit of a mess, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. But we'll go back to where it all began. We'll go back to 2009 Brazil. So Carlos Monteiro is the person who came up with this concept of ultra-processed foods, and the first paper came about, published in a British nutrition journal called Public Health Nutrition, and the premise was it's not about nutrients, it's about level of processing. We've been doing this wrong in nutrition research, and we haven't considered this processing thing. And the reason Monteiro was approaching the problem from this angle is from his experience in nutrition epidemiology, study of food and health in Brazil. They were seeing some really concerning problems, as we are doing in other parts of the world. They were seeing an increase in non-communicable diseases, and then strangely, or so they thought, they were observing things like a decrease in intake of sugars, different types of sugars. So it's a situation of, well, what on earth is going on here? This doesn't seem to make sense. So they thought they needed to look at this problem in a different way. Maybe it's processing them. And to give you some more context, I guess they were observing that the nature of the foods that people were eating in Brazil is changing a lot, moving away from traditional food practices and eating behaviours, and seeing that shift towards more convenience products and pre-prepared products and so on. And as we do in science, we hypothesize and try and come up with new ideas and explanations that we can then test using the scientific method. So this hypothesis was that it's not so much the nutrients, this was the title of the paper, so much as the processing. So let's have a look at processing. And this is a quote directly from Carlos Monteiro, and to try and sum up then, the purpose is different from other foods. It's about creating affordable food products, and then he talks about this concept NOVA 1, 2, and 3. So NOVA just means new, obviously, and here's our new way of categorising foods. And I won't go into it to too much depth because honestly we could talk about the NOVA system all day long. Suffice to say, it started off in 2009 as a kind of we need to talk about processing situation. And then it went through various iterations throughout the years, and we ended up with what's now very widely known as the NOVA system. And the NOVA system categorises all food into 4 pots. We've got minimally processed foods, we've got processed culinary ingredients, so that's one step up from your apple, your carrot, whatever, minimally processed ingredients. Then we have processed foods, and then ultimately in the NOVA system we now have ultra-processed foods. Some people don't like the term ultra in and of itself, but this ultra-processing then suggests that it's processing, you know, to the umpteenth degree. It's been taken really far. It's industrial foods. But of particular interest for a nutrition epidemiologist who's critical of this system, it also talks about not just the nature of processing, so the type of processing, but the purpose of processing too. Now, I'm wondering if you're already doing a mental head scratch here, thinking, how does the purpose of what we do to food factor in to biology? How does the purpose of food or the profitability of food affect how it's metabolised in the body? And this is really at the heart of why some of us in nutrition epidemiology have a problem with this system. Essentially, it's an ideology, and it's an ideology which is against big food. And I don't have any problems at all about some issues with so-called big food. I'm very interested in the commercial determinants of health, and I'm really pleased to see that over recent years there's been a huge spotlight put on that. And one of the good things about the NOVA system, in fact, is that it has put that spotlight on these problematic industries, and a lot more people are aware of them and talking about them. However, to me, it would feel slightly more, I suppose, honest in some way if we called this system ultra-marketed foods, for example, because then we have a distinction that it's about politics and you know, the global situation. It's about neoliberalism, for example, rather than about nutrients and how they interact in the human body. Okay. But at the same time, we do know we've got a problem, just like in Brazil and many other industrialised countries. This is a graph you don't really need to sort of be able to see in detail, but this is the rate of deaths due to diabetes in the UK since 2002, with some projected figures here up at the right-hand side. And this, you know, I'm sure you'll agree, that's really extremely alarming. And we're seeing similar issues with other diet-related health outcomes. So we know there's something really going on here. And so we've come to this situation now with this new way of categorising foods, where in nutrition world, we've kind of jumped on that, taken the ball and run with it. Right, it's all, we've seen these problems, and it's all because of ultra-processed foods. And so that's who's talking about it. They're talking about it an awful lot in the scientific community. To my mind, really rather uncritically, which is disappointing. Because in science we have rules. We have rules of how we conduct science, and we have rules in nutrition epidemiology and in public health. We have something called the Bradford-Hill criteria, for example. So when we're looking at an association, when we're looking at an exposure and an outcome, and we're trying to work out, does this thing cause this thing? For example, we need to look at temporality. Did the exposure precede the outcome, for example? What's the mechanism here? We need to understand what the mechanism is. We can't just say, we think this does this. We need to come up with a plausible biological pathway why this thing may cause this thing. And we need to be able to see that that's consistent too, that it happens in different places and at different times. Ideally, we'd like to see a dose response too. And if you think about it, then we have this category of NOVA foods, which includes things like Monster energy drink or Red Bull energy drinks, those kind of things. It includes things like, you know, mass-produced pastries and cakes, but it also includes things like a tin of baked beans or a loaf of wholemeal bread. And I am wondering what the biological plausible pathways there that all those foods have in common, which they sort of affect health in various ways that we're seeing in the literature. And some of the ways that scientists and researchers are investigating are suggesting that all these foods are causing outcomes as diverse as cancer, as heart disease, but also as insomnia and depression. And there's not too much talk about plausible biological mechanisms, which is concerning because it feels like we are chasing ideology here and we're not adhering to the rules of science, we're not playing the game by the rules. So there's been a lot of criticism about the so-called evidence, and if you do a review of evidence, but the primary studies in your review are not very good, I'm sure you've all heard that phrase, garbage in, garbage out. And people quoting these reviews, oh, the evidence is in, we've got enough, we need to act. But actually the science is really all over the place. Most of it's observational and most of it's based on food frequency questionnaires, which are not suited to answer questions of this type. For example, food frequency questionnaire is a long list of foods with response options saying, how often do you eat this food? And you work your way down 200 items or whatever, and you say 2 to 3 times a day, tick, or once a week, or once a month. It's a difficult thing to do cognitively anyway, but the funny thing is that most of these food frequency questionnaires, well, probably 95% of the ones used in studies of ultra-processed foods, were actually created before the concept of ultra-processed foods came into being. So in fact, they're not a valid tool to measure the intake of ultra-processed foods. Full stop. I have to actually leave now and go home because for me that's really fundamental. Because when someone's ticking a box to say, do you eat pizza 2 to 3 times a week, once a month, blah, 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 there's no more information there as to whether you made that pizza and it was organic, handcrafted sourdough base, and beautifully, lovingly made, like Mama used to make tomato sauce, or it went down to Heaven Foods and got 3 for a pound. We don't know. We've got absolutely no way of knowing. But we can gloss over that inconvenience thing, or we just say, no, it's fine, science. Some people recognise that and try to sort of take this scientific evidence to the next level then. So what's our gold standard in epidemiology? Let's do a randomised control trial. So some of you who are interested in ultra-processed foods might have heard people talk about the Kevin Hall study, which was done a few years ago now, where they locked 20 people up in a hospital for a month, and they tried to do a randomised control trial. So similar to like you would get in the pharmaceutical industry, you're supposed to hold all things constant except the one thing you're testing. Then you look at the 2 groups at the end, look for any differences, and then you can say with a reasonable level of confidence that if you see a difference, it's due to the thing that you're testing. Okay? And that's okay if you've got pills, because you can give one set of people the active pill, and then you give the other set of people the placebo pill. Nobody knows, everyone's blinded to the treatment, whatever. You do your measurements, a lovely bit of science and a bit of clarity at the end of it. Well, how do you do that with food? How do you feed people a diet that is nutritionally equivalent, that is matched for energy, for calories, for fibre, for everything you can think of, carbohydrates, to identical diets, and yet one of them is ultra-processed, whatever that means, and one of them isn't. It's not possible, and this is one of the unique things about trying to investigate things in diet and health. It's extremely difficult. There was a book came out last year, and the nice quote that I do remember from the book was, nutrition isn't rocket science, it's actually much harder than that. And I agree, because when we're trying to study, you cannot blind people to the food that you're giving them. So just to give you an example of that, this is one of the test meals that the participants in the study ate. So this is the ultra-processed meal. So we've got some fig biscuits there, shortbread biscuits, we've got some canned peaches and syrup, we've got some chicken sandwiches, I think it's a canned chicken, we've got mayonnaise, we've got deadly ultra-processed mayonnaise in there. And then we've got these drinks which may seem a little bit odd to you, I'll explain those in a minute. Now this is the matched equivalent meal. So this is supposed to be an identical meal to the other one, matched for whatever, okay? Now these are the best scientists in the world. This is funded by the National Institutes of Health in the States, enormous resources going into this study. They would have had a great team of dietitians, no doubt, doing the clever stuff, matching for energy content, carbohydrate, fibre and so on, these important nutrients. But I think you don't need to be a dietitian or a nutrition expert to see that those meals are really different. And there's no equivalence there, because you give someone a huge bowl of practically raw broccoli, we've got a different eating experience there to a white bread chicken sandwich. I think we can all agree that. And what's going on with these drinks, okay? I don't know about you, but I don't normally have 2.5 pints of lemonade with my main meal of the day. And for sure, I don't have lemonade that's got a fibre supplement stirred into it. Because it's really difficult to match these meals. So they did their best, you know, fair play. I get it, I get what they're trying to do. But is it valid? How valid can we say this is? So the instructions to participants were just eat as much as you want, you know, go for it with that broccoli. And then they go off and they weigh all the leftovers, and they can really meticulously work out how much people have eaten. Okay? So essentially, what are we saying here? We're saying you just can't really do the trials that you need to do to prove anything in nutrition science. Maybe what they could have done is got 2 pizzas. Maybe they could have done that simple thing and had a pizza that was minimally processed, whatever that means, versus a pizza that was made from a different level of processing. Again, maybe that's just philosophically too odd and they couldn't do it, but maybe they could have done. So again, we've got this pizza here and we've got this pizza here. And so we've thought about the science, but what's the spin there? So the spin, the world will have you believe, all your nutrition influencers and crew will have you believe then, this lovely artisan sourdough pizza is extremely nutritionally different to that other pizza. I'm already hoping you're kind of thinking, is this just about how much that food costs? Because one of those pizzas costs a heck of a lot more than the other one. That's the biggest difference I'm seeing. Nutritionally, nothing to see here really in terms of the difference. Now your Instagram bunch, your NutriBabble crew, will go, well, it's the additives, it's the emulsifiers, you know, microbiome emulsifiers, and whatever other various additives. At which point I say, hang on a minute, so we're talking about processing, ultra-processed food, but now we're talking about formulation, it's additives. So make your mind up, which one is it going to be? Because we have a lot of good research, as good as it can be, about nutrients. The first kind of half a decade of nutrition science, which is quite a young science, focused solely on nutrients. We do have some good studies looking at nutrients. We're now shifting to try and talk more about foods because people eat foods, not isolated nutrients. So again, this ultra-processing situation, you know, how coherent is it? And we're looking at this. But the scientists are talking, the bloggers are talking, everyone's talking about ultra-processed food. Who else is talking about ultra-processed food? You might recognise this guy I just played a quick clip.
Slice whole meal, no added sugar, right? So that's okay. Talk me through what's in that.
This let's have a quick look at the ingredients and check it is. So it's got vegetable oils, including sustainable palm. There's no such thing as sustainable palm. Let's be clear about this. And palm fat that's in this is not the red spicy liquid that you squeeze out of palm nuts for West African cooking. This is refined, bleached, deodorized, hydrogenated and into esterified palm fat. So that makes it up. Then there's wheat gluten. And then there's emulsifiers E471, E481, E472E. So that is diacetyl tartaric acid esters and monomer diglycerides of fatty acids. So this is ultra-processed bread. I mean, it's all my, other foods with lots of ingredients. Yes, tick. Foods with health claims, no added sugar. Real bread. So I would say it may be useful for many people to not think of this or any bread like this as real bread.
It looks real to me. I don't know, I've seen them. I've seen those in the shop, I've touched them, I'm pretty sure they are real. But Chris thinks otherwise. Now, why so certain? Why so certain, Chris? Science isn't certain. Science, as you know, nutrition science, the biggest mess you can get really, saturated fat, heart disease, oh no, it's fine now, you can eat saturated fat. You know, it's a young science, okay? Anyone who's certain in nutrition, I think red flag. Really, really wonder about it, what's going on here. Red flag, in my opinion, particularly if you're a children's TV presenter, which is a bit facetious. He is also an infectious diseases doctor, if you get what I'm saying. So, why so certain? Because we have careers to build on this. We can sell books. We can sell a lot of books. People love to read about food and nutrition. but it's not doing anyone a great service because it's confusing people, it's adding to nutrition confusion, which is a kind of a known thing in the literature. Again, things seem to chop and change. Do people really trust scientists anymore? And we're at a point in history where that's a really critical issue. Trust in science. We need to take that really seriously. So we can't afford this flip-flopping around. Who's leading the discourse here? It tends to be people who have books to sell and who are making a living doing media appearances, and that concerns me. What also concerns me is this issue is a sticky one. People like it. It makes sense to them. People like simplistic ways, good, bad. It's easy to understand what's good for me to eat, what's bad for me to eat, and I get that makes sense to people. But in the science community, people who are questioning this tend to be the victims of ad hominem attacks. So the person is criticised, it's a pile-on. Oh, you've had money from the food industry, you're a food industry shill. And people are shouted down who push back against this concept of ultra-processed foods. Again, concerning because we're kind of losing sight of how we're supposed to be doing science here. We don't attack the person when something comes up. We're supposed to be able to have differences of opinion in science because that's how we push knowledge forward. But food is getting increasingly politicised. I actually haven't had funding from the food industry. I'm concerned about this concept for so many other reasons. And I wrote something fairly recently about this. I tried to propose a sensible alternative, and then I wrote an accompanying article for the conversation. And then very, very shortly afterwards, I got an email from a concerned American citizen telling me that, we do our own research and so on, because the situation in the States is it's gone to another level with RFK as health secretary there. So food is becoming extremely politicised, and it's becoming a bit of a battleground. Again, this ultra-processing is really complex, super interesting. The sociologists could work on this forever. But if you think about it, who is embracing the concept? But there's a lot of people out there, particularly in the States, the trad wife crew, they want women back in the kitchen, they want women back doing the chopping, so processed food's the enemy, So there's all sorts of layers of complexity to this situation. We need really strong leadership, we need good public health, strong leadership, because there are still those problems. How do we tackle them? Well, we need to stick to the principles of public health. First and foremost, of course, is do no harm. And this is why I think everyone needs to stop talking about UPFs, because I do consider that it's doing quite a lot of harm, in fact. People love to talk about Marion Nestle's work. 23 years ago, she wrote an excellent book called Food Politics, which people seem to have only just come to and discovered, and talks about the sort of analogies with the tobacco industry, for example, and everyone piles on that now and churns out the same kind of sentences you see all the time when talking about harmful industries. But food is not tobacco. Food is its own unique thing with its own special complexities. I feel fairly confident sitting on a bus next to someone who's eating Doritos that I'm not going to get a passive Dorito. So it's not the same situation, and we need to stop saying it's the same situation. We need expertise in food and nutrition, as well as expertise in commercial determinants of health and so on. We've got to get away from this us and them kind of thing. Another thing that's problematic is it's extremely stigmatising, this discourse. Because at the end of the day, processed food is just snobbery. It's just another form of snobbery. But it's stigmatising food generally that people of lower socioeconomic groups can afford, can access. Processed foods are shelf-stable, they're cheap, they're affordable, they won't go off. Guess what? Normal people eat these foods. But we have an issue. We look at psychology research and we see things like the boomerang effect, which is an example of psychological reactance, which is where if someone feels their freedom is threatened, then they kind of double down or they have a knee-jerk reaction. And I think we can all relate to that as human beings. It's a bit of a don't press the big red button situation. I'm going to press the button. And we see this in health research, so when people have been told to drink less alcohol or to smoke less or whatever, they do double down on those behaviours in some instances and do the thing more, so that's the boomerang effect. We don't want that. And we find that in other studies, if health messages are presented in a way that reduces psychological reaction, then the health messages are far more effective. So again, this kind of judgmental stigmatisation is not working. We're actually doing some work at Leeds Beckett with colleagues at Sheffield Hallam at the moment, looking at food stigma and food judgment and trying to work out how people feel about these things. Anyone recognise these? I don't think they're around anymore, Findus crispy pancakes, okay? So, what is wrong with a Findus crispy pancake, you know? I'm sure very many people have got happy memories of tucking into a Findus crispy pancake. Yet feels like this now, are kind of demonised, stigmatised as like low grade, you know, poor people's food. We don't want to admit to eating that kind of food. And we're doing focus groups with people, and these issues are coming up, the fear of judgment of people around them. And I think this ultra-processed food discourse is just exacerbating this. It's setting this unrealistic standard about what food should be and what healthy eating looks like. And it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Here's another one for your delectation and delight. There you go, the killer Viennetta. Oh, don't eat one of those. So it's like this moral ranking of foods. So if this has been made in someone's, you know, £2,000 ice cream maker at home in the kitchen with Madagascar vanilla extract or something like that, then that's ice cream that's allowed. But if you buy it in the freezer section at Tesco's or whatever, that's not allowed. Is that an ultra-processing thing, or is it something else? I think it's something else. In the extreme then, we're going into this territory. We're going into disordered eating territory, which is harm. There's no doubt about it. It's harmful, and no one's talking about this at the moment. And I find that extremely concerning. So when we get to the extremes, we get things called avoidant restrictive food intake disorders. And then one part of that is orthorexia nervosa, which is an extreme preoccupation with healthy eating. And ARFID, the first category I told you about, that's the fastest rising category of disordered eating and eating disorders over the last 10 years. And overall, sort of consultations for eating disorders over the past few years have gone up 40%. Highly, highly concerning, and I think this narrative is potentially feeding into that. People come to me at work and go, oh, have you seen this? Have you seen this? And please don't show me. You know, I couldn't find the original one, but there was a woman on a Facebook healthy eating group, and the message was words to the effect of, oh my God, I'm killing my children. I've just found out that chickpeas have got you know, calcium chloride in. Where can I go for chickpeas that don't have calcium chloride? I've been to 3 supermarkets and I can't find them. What on earth is going on? Now I get there's certain demographic of people who are interested in food and health. There's also, you know, demographic of people, I'm one, who when their kids were small, they let them watch Dr. Chris and Dr. Sam, that Operation Out. So we trust Dr. Chris. We think he's great. But then, so he changes lanes and writes a book that's very accessible and very interesting, and we believe it. So there's something here about the trusted messenger as well. Put to one side that they're not a qualified trusted messenger, but a trusted messenger. And this is where it ends up. And I contend that this is harm. This is doing harm. It's well-meaning, it's very well-intentioned, but it's misguided, and we can do without it. This is the graph showing the increase in hospitalisations for eating disorders. Here, we've got more harm. Food insecurity, rising to unprecedented levels, you know, in a wealthy Western country. What's going on? So this year, we've got 12% of UK households experiencing food insecurities. 6 million adults. 2.2 million children are going hungry in our country today. How does that fit with this narrative of please avoid ultra-processed foods? It's harm, it's doing harm. We know that it's much more expensive to buy healthy calories. You know, it's been estimated it's around twice as expensive to feed your children, for example, you know, healthy foods, and many people, it is beyond their reach. And so again, we need to let go of this idealistic view of what healthy eating looks like, because beans on toast is great, you know, you've got plenty of fibre there. Why is someone wandering around into the House of Lords Commission with his props of tin beans and a loaf of bread and saying, we need to, you know, these should be banned or whatever? It's just, it's crazy to me, totally crazy to me. Essentially what I'm saying here is this whole narrative is extremely classed. It's a bunch of people who look a certain way, from a certain background, privileged background, who have taken an interest, as many of us do, particularly when we hit a certain point in life. Oh, right, I need to live forever now, I need to start eating better. I found this thing, and in some people's case, and now everyone needs to do the same as me. I've got this, I've worked it out, and this is what we need to do. And my frustration is we're not hearing from the nutritionist, the public health nutritionist there to try and provide more context, because not everyone has got the time or the agency or simply the headspace to put together this idealistic, you know, ideal diet kind of thing. We don't all shop in farmers markets. What's the #1 offender here? The good old avocado, you name it. What else have we got? Garlic syrup, chia seeds, you know, whatever. And I'm seeing this. I teach at Leeds Beckett University, and we get dietetic students coming in the first year. We do food practicals with them, and we try and get them to do one meal and then do a healthier version of the meal. And they're all about the chia seeds, and you know, let's get some avocados in there. And they're absorbing what healthy eating is, because when we think of healthy eating, I suppose we think of Instagram maybe, and what do you see? A glossy white kitchen with a thin person next to a big bowl of really delicious looking fruit. And that's how we've been conditioned to think about food. And this ultra-processed food narrative, again, is the antithesis of that. And it's not reality. It's not where most people live, okay? In fact, in effect, what we've got here, this is my totally facetious graph. The vertical axis there is the food police score. And it's basically just snobbery, isn't it? It's like, we like the thing, the more it costs. So our lovely artisan, handcrafted sourdough loaf is 10 times the price of a supermarket white sliced. Yep, I would prefer it if people ate wholemeal sliced, but you know, if that's your thing, and if that's what you can afford, that's what you can afford, and that's the reality of where we are, whether we like it or not. I'm conscious I'm running out of time. This slide, I realised, unfortunately, won't play. Maybe it's good it won't play, because then you don't get to see the steam coming out of my ears. Because Tim, again, a very well-meaning and respected scientist, coming at this from a certain angle, let's say. So to paraphrase, you can go and look this up, it's on BBC iPlayer. This little bit of food recommendations, and I kid you not, is about small bits of organic dark chocolate. You tend to hear the same things over and over again. How his organic delivery food basket has changed his life, you know. And red wine, because it's good for the microbes. And that's his healthy eating advice. Don't even get me started. And so again, it's kind of anti-big food, anti-capitalist. Do you know what, Tim? No, you can't pick and choose the bits of capitalism you like or you don't like, because when it suits you and it's going to your bank balance, seemingly it's okay to you know, get in bed with big food or make a profit. So essentially, what am I saying here? Okay, I think the UPF thing, it's an example of lifestyle drift. So again, it's like individual blaming for much, much bigger, much more complex structural problems that we have with our society and our food supply. Post-World War II, we asked the food industry to feed the nation, and they did it. They got really good at it. They made shelf-stable, affordable food that was accessible. Maybe they got too good at it. Again, that's not individual people's issue. We need some political interest here to sort of get to the heart of this. We need social policies rather than individual blaming. Because we've ended up with this kind of situation where we've demonised a whole category of foods. This is from an exhibition that we're running currently in Leeds. It's in the market in Leeds. We asked academics and people and public health people to sort of submit images to sum up how they feel, how it's going at the moment in food. And this was mine, and it's called Gaslight. Because that's how it feels in nutrition research at the moment. it's a bizarre situation, the whole ultra-processed food thing. And my other take-home message to everyone who's interested in food is, it doesn't matter, you know, we've got really neurotic about it, this ultra-processed food thing. It doesn't matter how much flaxseed you sprinkle on your porridge, we're not getting out of here alive, you know? Live your lives. Don't get so hung up. And that's what this messaging is telling us to people who, like, you know, forensically looking at ingredient labels on things for harmful things. We live in Europe. We've got some really good regulations and restrictions. We're not actually allowed to put poison in our food. So we're okay, you know, live. If you want one of them, have one of them. Don't live on them, don't have them 10 times a day, whatever. But we need a bit of consistency, we need a bit of common sense in the debate. And that is why we really seriously need to stop talking about ultra-processed foods. And for my final slide, I'll just show you this quote, which is, if you put your eye down to the bottom, you'll see it comes from 1929. So, you know, things haven't changed all that much. What do we need to be talking about instead of ultra-processed foods then? I think it's about recognising individual agency. We need to empower people to make actionable changes that are actually possible and realistic within the context of actual modern lives. And to take a principle from public health, we need to really think about what's called universal proportionalism, which is we need, most of all, to enact policies and, you know, do things in the world that reduce inequalities and social and health inequalities rather than increase them. Thank you.
Beverley, thank you. That was great. It was excellent, and you certainly achieved the clarity objective I set you.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I mean, the clarity for me was that it is not as simple as is often made out, which I thought you got across very powerfully. The other thing your slides achieved is you made me feel hungry. Whether that's intended or not, I don't know. Okay, I want to throw it open to your questions. I'm going to slip it a bit because we started late. We've got 20 minutes really, so that's a decent amount of time. But this has been bothering me all the way through. So this is a real point of information from your slide, the diabetes slide, which showed that increase. But around the time of the pandemic, what was that all about?
In reality, it's not going to be that suddenly people stopped becoming diabetic. It's probably more an artefact of people couldn't get the diagnosis.
So they weren't getting diagnosed.
Yeah, they were staying at home being diabetic.
It's a blip. It's a non-existent blip, really. If we hadn't had a pandemic.
Yeah, and you see that a lot with pandemics.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. That might be the explanation, but I want to clarify that. Okay. Right. Let's throw it open to questions. Don't be shy in coming forward. I'm sure we will have a number. Let's start with our friend in the middle there. Oh yes, we have a mic, so we'll be able to hear it hopefully.
Thank you. That was very interesting what you said. But given that we do have a lot of health issues, I'm speaking as a nurse. We have a lot of health issues. That diet is part of that. What would you say the message we should be trying to get across? Because there is this problem, isn't there, of, you know, as you say, we've said one thing and we say something else and we say something else, and I come across either people are doing absolutely everything to the nth degree, or people say I'm not wanting to do anything. So how do we kind of make it so that people have the information and can make the changes without the stigma of saying these foods should just be avoided at all costs?
Yeah, and that's at the crux of it, isn't it? And on an individual level, I'm afraid, I mean, I used to reject this when I was younger and in nutrition. I was all contemplating, no, you know, the Eat Well guide or whatever iteration it used to be, that's so boring, it's not good enough for you. But nutritional advice really hasn't changed, and it really is boring, and it boils down to common sense, and it's things in moderation. Ideally, I think we should be eating more, and this is a term I've come up with, unrefined plant foods, which is trying to not talk about processing, because a lot of this discourse as well, plants that seed in people's minds that the food industry is bad, processing per se is bad, which is not the case. Those things are not linked to harm. And at higher level, at policy level, we have structures in place. So we have the HFSS category of foods in this country. So that's based on something called a nutrient profile model, where they basically score foods on whether they're very high in fat, salt and sugar. And that's called the HFSS. So some regulations are being enacted in recent times, and it's been tweaked again, so that we can identify, we have the mechanisms to identify less healthy foods, you know, like the traffic light system and so on. And it's not perfect, and no food categorisation system ever will be, because, as I said, foods are unbelievably complicated. And even if you have foods that have that red traffic light on, that still can be part of a healthy diet. I guess that's probably the one single message, you know, again, we want, it's complex, and we can't really boil it down to one simple hack and do this thing and you live forever, because it's food, you can't do that. But I guess if we're thinking, it's better to think of in terms of a dietary pattern rather than a meal level, for example. So I guess if across the week you feel you're getting that balance, which means then it's okay to have that food that's got a red traffic light on it every once in a while. And to me, I hate this thing of this RFK in the States, as health secretary, wants to go back in time to this fantasy that, by the way, never happened, this sort of bucolic, you know, live off the land, grass-fed beef, and it's a total fantasy. But in one sense, I do think there's something to think about how things used to be. I cringe to hear myself saying it, but how things used to be is you'd have a cake when it was your birthday and your mum would make it, whereas now we can buy cake every day we want from Pound and Tesco's. So there is that different there, and it is to do with the food environment. And by the way, the cake your mum made, it just, the stuff you buy off shelf pales into insignificance, isn't it? It's not the same thing, it's not equivalent. So I guess it's hard, the genie's out of the bottle, because we've got generations now who are used to the packeted food and that version of a cake or a biscuit. It's complicated. Not sure that answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah, right. Up there, thank you.
I don't know if I have an actual question, but I guess the word that kept coming into my mind as you were talking, you mentioned the word mistrust. You know, and I guess I'm thinking this sort of conspiracy theories, that whole element of thinking that we can't trust organisations, we can't trust scientists, we can't trust people. I think this is the sort of, for me, this is the sort of underneath all of this, isn't it? Is what is happening.
It's really terrifying.
Where we are mistrusting, and we actually don't know who to trust.
Yeah.
And I think this is across many dimensions of life, isn't it?
It is.
I guess I'm trying to formulate my question to you in relation to that is, what do we do about that? Because how do we know who to trust?
Yeah, what do we do? And this is my issue with Chris Van Tolden, who's, I'm sure, a lovely guy and that really, really means well, but isn't qualified. And it was very distressing to many of us to see him in the House of Lords giving evidence last year, whenever it was. Sitting next to Christina Vogel, who's a highly esteemed, highly experienced person, and if you watch the feedback, she's incredibly professional, because when he sits there doing that, she's got a poker face, well done, Christina. But, so that's really disturbing to me, but we have form for that in this country, because if you're Jamie Oliver or Marcus Rashford, then suddenly you get the attention in the political world, and this is how the world works now, isn't it? And I think my frustration is our professional body, the Association for Nutrition, and I'm not seeing too much of them out there. I'm not quite sure, because again, it's clicks and likes, and if you're well known on media, then your message lands and everything else feels drowned out. And by the way, this is not trivial. There's research showing there is something of a pretty clear pipeline between kind of wellness all the way to QAnon in the States. So it really is quite sinister. And so trust is unbelievably relevant at the moment. And it, again, I think we have to ask ourselves in this country, what do we want to base our policy on? Do we want to go on vibes, or do we want to go on science?
Okay, I'm sure there will be more. Every person has a question in them, I'm sure.
Yes, I have a simple question. Can you define unprocessed, processed and ultra-processed?
Well, that's the $1 million question, because I don't think anybody can. You may be interested, you could go on onto the internet, and there was a study done, I think 4 years ago now, possibly 2022, by a French researcher. And she asked 170 food nutrition professionals and nutrition scientists if they could define NOVA, if they could categorise, class foods into the NOVA system, and they couldn't. So if they can't do it, I'm not quite sure if anyone else can. And but again, why are we hanging up on the processing? If humans hadn't processed foods, humans wouldn't have evolved to where we are now, because everything is a process. You chop an apple, that's processed. So again, it's sending out the wrong message that processing per se is harmful. That's not the case, and there isn't good evidence for that. Personally, I wrote a paper a few months ago to try and put forward an alternative view, because there's many of us are saying, gosh, this is awful, we shouldn't be talking about this, but there's not too many alternatives being put out there. And my suggestion is it would be better to talk about foods that people should be eating more of than foods people should be eating less of, a positive health message. So let's concentrate on, I wanted to call them UPFs, unrefined plant foods, but I thought that was a bit naughty. So I called them unrefined plant foods, where the plant foods is just one word. And then again, I think that's something that people can relate to. I think intuitively, people know what that is, and we shouldn't be speaking down to people and have these really technical systems. So people who are loving the ultra-processed food system, and they're recognising it's problematic, and they keep trying to redefine it or tweak the boundaries. No, it's this. No, it includes this food. No, it doesn't. And we're getting to this ridiculous stage where there's various new iterations of it even, and there's now we've got an app. You can help. We don't need an app to go to the supermarket. That's ridiculous. But people are not stupid. So I just think we need to throw that out and start talking about things in a different and more positive way.
Yeah. Thank you. I should declare at the beginning that 50 years ago I was in a Mother's Pride bakery watching them making the stuff that you described. 30 years ago I was in Long Benton making crispy pancakes. Not directly, I'm just extremely grateful you didn't put a Kit Kat up as well, otherwise I would have been bound to rights. But I guess over my lifetime the whole concept of cooking and eating, especially of cooking, has changed completely in the West. It's very difficult to see how that will come back. So my question to you is really, should we actually now forget about nutrition and simply focus on Ozempic and other sorts of treatments and chemicals to counteract the effect of all the bad stuff that we're eating, rather than fight a lost cause, which I fear you're talking about?
Well, there's a lot of shareholders out there who think that's the ideal scenario, but I'm a public health nutritionist, and I find it a bit queasy-making that it's just very bleak, isn't it, to think that. And again, all this kind of individual finger-pointing to people, we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk. So we stopped doing food education in schools, and then we're telling people to eat healthily, eat healthily. We say it's important, but we don't show it's important. So we have school dinners that are put out to tender for the lowest possible, you know. We teach children in primary schools how to be healthy and good, and then when it's lunchtime, it's like, get them in, get them in, get them in, get them out, get them out. You know, food's not, you don't get that. I remember going on a French exchange when I was 13 or something, and went to this high school, and they all sat around and they all served themselves. So our food culture is a bit dead in the water at the moment, isn't it, here? But again, and this is why it's so much more complex than just coming up with this category and going, that's the problem. That's not the problem, it's much bigger. You really need to look around. Anyone who drops their children off at school, I remember dropping my kids off at school, and I would literally see people running down the path to get to work. So, and then presumably they run back up the path to collect the child and run home. When are they supposed to be doing all this chopping and, you know, sauteing or whatever? It's the shape of our lives. There's just some really fundamental issues here that need looking at. But it's a lot harder, isn't it, to try and tackle those and just think, oh, let's put a label on something saying skull and crossbones or ultra-processed food there, we'll solve the problem.
I'm going to use the chair's privilege, asking a question of my own, just sort of touch on some of the things you talked about. I mean, I'm sure most people would recognise what you're saying, that you can't just simply say that big food is like the devil incarnate and everything they do is bad. But nevertheless, would you agree that there are some things that perhaps should be regulated more powerfully than they are? Think about advertising of certain bad foods. And also just the fact that you go into some shops which aren't really food shops, and there's some really bad foods, or things that if you eat too much of them are bad for you, right there at the point when you're paying for something else that's unrelated to food. I'm not going to name the shop that I've got in my mind, but I mean, are we tough enough about that? Are we tough enough about that sort of stuff, do you think?
Well, it's tricky, again, because on the one hand, I really resent, on behalf of people who work in the food industry, amazing food scientists, like the best people in the world, probably intelligence, who do incredible things, and it's so maligned now, and that just feels like extremely unfair. Big food, like with other bigs, big gambling, big alcohol, you know, there are harmful industries, but again, it's food. We need food to live, so it's a lot more of a grey area. And how do you enact policy? Should Kit Kats be banned? Some people seriously think they should. Some people think, put them in plain packaging or whatever. There are foods. There's foods I'm kind of resentful because I don't so much see the food as the corporate entity behind the food, like, Nutella or Oreos, the power behind these products and that global power, not to mention the environmental catastrophe that's behind some of the ingredients in those foods. So that they are problematic, but it's then a case of where do you draw the line? Now, we've got some political will, so we've enacted advertising restrictions on HFSS food products. Came into play in January, and that categorisation is going to be timed up, but there's a lot further to go. But it's really difficult. It's so systemic because you can't walk down the street without going past a bus stop without a fast food advert or whatever. But councils need that money. They need that money, and literally in some places the bus stop is owned by the company. So if you don't let them put their advert on there, they will take that bus stop, and there won't be a bus stop there. So it's incredibly complex, so much more so than this scratch the surface way of looking at it.
Well, we've probably got time for at least 2 more questions if we're fairly brief.
Hi,
Okay.
that was really interesting and very insightful. I guess I've got a couple of points. One is about what policy changes do you think actually need to be made, like from the school level and upwards, really, is where I'm thinking. And sort of a lot of what you say seems to be about interconnected points and about social norms changing and social beliefs changing about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. I take an anecdotal example from my son went to school. In his pack-up, he had a chocolate chip, something, cake or something. And a teacher told him that he shouldn't be having that because that was bad for him. I'm like, at what point do you think that's bad for him if he's having a balanced diet? So I think for me, it's that sort of idea that one person can make a judgment when actually their evidence of what he's eating is based on that one moment in time, no other moments. And actually that is about their social beliefs or health beliefs about what is correct and incorrect for a diet. So I think I'm just asking really about policies and the social things that need to change or what we can try and change, which are hard.
Yeah, so it has to be looking at this as a systems approach. So a few years ago there was a meeting and it came up with something called the Foresight Map of Obesity. And if you look that up, it's great because it shows the unbelievable complexity that feeds into the development of obesity. You can't, it hurts your eyes to look at. It's so incredibly complex. So I'm kind of saying I can't answer your question because it's so complex and there are so many factors. For example, time. It's just if people had more time, then maybe they have more headspace to do that planning and reduce their food waste and blah, blah, blah. All the things we're being asked to do. But when you're living like a rat on a wheel or you're working 2 jobs because the cost of living has gone crazy, the complex solutions, these highly complex issues. And on the school thing, I've heard this kind of thing so much, and it's really difficult because people are doing the best they can with the knowledge they have. But for example, in the extreme, I know of a group of GPs who again are like, oh, we've solved this, ultra-processed food is terrible, have been going into schools and literally delivering lessons and saying that children's food is toxic. They're using that word in schools. I mean, how stigmatising can you get? A bunch of middle-class, skinny, you know, park runners, no offence, who think, and they're trying, they're well-meaning, but it's really, this is why we need this strong leadership, specifically in public health nutrition. So that would be my one big ask, is to take this issue more seriously. Don't give it out to Henry Dimbleby, because he's mates with Boris Johnson, you know, and he's just another rich person I know. Actually follow the expertise, because there's going to be a tipping point somewhere here, and we need to take it a lot more seriously.
The whole class thing is fascinating, isn't it? Which, when you were talking, it reminded me of the thing in the debate about the dangers of alcohol and minimising alcohol. That people who claimed that some people allegedly said that if they buy their wine from Waitrose, it'll be better for them if they buy the wine, or not as harmful if they buy the wine from somewhere cheaper. You know. There is a very strong class element to
and even in
these
nutrition globally, if you look at team nutrition, you'll see you'll see it a certain type, and it's kind of funny because one of these, is it or isn't it, things in nutrition is red wine. Is it good for you? Isn't it? It's no coincidence that middle class academics like red wine.
Right. Wait a minute. We could take one more question if there is one. There doesn't have to be one, but yeah. Oh. All right, let's take two. Keep them really brief and answer
I'll do it
briefly.
brief, yeah.
So, absolutely fascinating. It was interesting to hear that this all started in Brazil, because I wouldn't really associated sort of the Western debate being started in Brazil. But I just wondered, what's it like in other cultures? I mean, are they going through the same kind of thing that we're going through?
Yeah, there's some shocking statistics of kind of, to simplify it, you know, the arrival of big food. So say in Pacific Islands, where you'd have you know, an indigenous way of life and diet, and then Coca-Cola rocks up, and then literally within 10-20 years you've got an epidemic of diabetes and overweight and obesity. You know, it's very clear and very shocking.
Okay, thank you. And our final question.
Thanks, that's been really interesting. What I was thinking about was food products are clearly like sold as individual things, but people don't, when you say balanced diet, that's never changed totally. But no one necessarily talks to us about the diet as a whole thing. You know, we get sold products. So yeah, you can't be demonised if you buy one cookie.
Yeah.
How do we like bring that conversation about diet and balancing, because it's not foisted upon us like buying products is?
Yeah, and again, I think if we had some leadership, I hate to say it because everyone always says, oh, schools, teachers, and puts all social, you know, evils in the responsibility of teachers. But this is so important. We can't look at childhood obesity once it's happened and then say we need to do something like it. We've got to go way further upstream, I think, so that people understand that again, it's okay to have these foods as part of a full kind of pattern. But in this world of clicks and follows and likes, that doesn't land, because we want something much more sensational and, you know, the boring, sensible thing just can't get traction at the moment. So I suppose it has to start with education. But again, I mean, people generally know, there's this assumption again that, oh, you know, poor people, you just need to tell them how to. People know, people are not stupid. And again, it's access and so on, so many other factors. But I guess schools.
Great, thank you. Sadly, I always find myself saying this, you know, we could go on for another hour because it's a very important subject and B, a fascinating one. So thank you for your questions and thank you for attending. There are, we're about a week, there's a week more of this festival to go. There's loads of other events on all sorts of other subjects. Please look at the programme if you haven't already done so. I hope you'll enjoy some others as well as this one. But for now, I wish you all a safe journey home, but can we show our appreciation to